For years, something was quietly wrong in the Florida Everglades. The swamp's apex predators, animals that had ruled these waters for millions of years, began disappearing without a trace. Not hunted, not relocated, simply gone. Scientists were baffled because nothing in North America hunts a full-grown crocodile. Nesting grounds fell silent, territories were abandoned, and then the evidence surfaced. What investigators uncovered wasn't a natural shift in the ecosystem, but the arrival of a predator that should never have been here, one with a long history of seeing humans as prey. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a warning. To understand why this discovery terrified scientists, you first have to understand what the Florida Everglades really are. Despite the postcard image of calm water and endless grass, this ecosystem is one of the most competitive battlegrounds on Earth. Life here isn't random. It's structured, refined, and brutally efficient. Every species occupies a role, and when one role is disrupted, the consequences ripple outward fast. For millions of years, the Everglades functioned under a rare balance at the very top of the food chain. Two apex predators ruled these waters: the American alligator and the American crocodile. They weren't rivals in constant war. Instead, they operated like neighboring kingdoms. Alligators dominated the freshwater marshes and inland swamps. Crocodiles controlled the brackish estuaries and coastal mangroves. Each knew its territory. Each respected the boundary. This separation wasn't accidental. It was the result of evolutionary fine-tuning. Alligators are powerful generalists, capable of thriving almost anywhere. Crocodiles, by contrast, are more specialized and more elusive. They are cautious, shy, and notoriously difficult to spot. In fact, despite their fearsome appearance, American crocodiles have never been responsible for a confirmed fatal attack on a human in the United States. Their survival strategy was avoidance, not confrontation. Because of this balance, the Everglades remained stable. Breeding grounds stayed active. Nesting territories remained occupied for decades. Dominant crocodiles held prime locations year after year, enforcing order simply by existing. Nothing challenged them. Nothing hunted them. They were the end of the line. That's why what happened next made no sense. In a system where apex predators do not flee, signs of abandonment are a red alert. When a ruler leaves its throne without a fight, it means something stronger has arrived, or something far more dangerous is operating unseen. And by the late 2000s, that exact pattern began to emerge. The Everglades weren't changing slowly. They were breaking their own rules, and no one yet understood why. The first warning signs didn't come from scientists or official reports. They came from the people who knew the swamp better than anyone else. Veteran airboat captains, wildlife trackers, and longtime rangers, people who could recognize individual crocodiles by scars and behavior, began noticing something deeply unsettling. The dominant animals were gone. These weren't young crocodiles drifting into new territory or weaker animals losing fights. These were the largest, most established American crocodiles in the region, the ones that had defended the same nesting sites for years, the ones that controlled the safest basking areas and forced every other predator to keep its distance. And suddenly, their territory was empty. What made it worse was the absence of evidence. There were no signs of struggle, no displaced rivals moving in, no remains washed up nearby. In a system driven by competition, an empty throne is usually claimed immediately. But in these areas, nothing replaced them. The best real estate in the Everglades sat abandoned, untouched. Then the silence began. Breeding grounds that should have been alive with movement went quiet. Rangers checking remote estuaries found nests that were never laid. Areas that had produced generations of juvenile crocodiles were suddenly barren. The soundscape changed. Fewer splashes, fewer warning hisses. The swamp felt wrong. Biologists recognized this pattern instantly. Apex predators don't abandon territory unless they're under pressure. When animals at the top of the food chain begin avoiding prime habitat, it signals a threat they cannot confront directly. Something had altered the risk equation so drastically that that survival meant retreat. Soon after, disturbing physical evidence appeared. Remains of crocodiles and alligators were discovered in places they never should have been. These weren't old animals dying naturally, they were prime adults. Some showed injuries inconsistent with in-species combat. Others seemed to have been killed quickly, efficiently, without the prolonged struggle expected when large predators clash. Adding to the confusion, reports of unusual behavior increased. Crocodiles were spotted in canals, near boat ramps, and close to urban areas, places they typically avoided. Some displayed aggression toward small boats and fishermen, behavior completely out of character for the normally reclusive American crocodile. The message was clear, even if the cause wasn't. Something had entered the Everglades that didn't respect the old rules, something powerful enough to make the kings run. When the disappearances became impossible to ignore, attention immediately turned to Florida's most infamous invader. For years, the Burmese python had been the villain of the Everglades. These massive constrictors had already devastated native mammal populations, wiping out raccoons, rabbits, and even deer. So when apex predators began vanishing, the assumption felt almost automatic. On paper, the theory made sense. Burmese pythons are capable of killing large prey. They ambush, coil, and suffocate animals far larger than themselves. And there was precedent. In 2005, a python attempted to swallow a 6-foot alligator and famously ruptured itself in the process. That image burned into the public consciousness. If a python could challenge an alligator once, maybe now, after decades of unchecked growth, it had finally won the arms race. As python populations spread deeper into mangrove forests, overlapping with American crocodile territory, the narrative wrote itself. The snakes had grown big enough. The crocodiles were losing. The swamp was witnessing the next phase of an invasive takeover. But biology doesn't lie. When researchers examined the evidence, the python theory began to fall apart. Pythons kill in a very specific way. Their prey shows crushing trauma. Bones are compressed. Internal organs rupture under sustained pressure. Even when a python fails, the struggle leaves unmistakable signs. That wasn't what investigators found. The crocodile remains showed no signs of constriction, no crushed ribs, no elongated suffocation injuries. In some cases, there were clean, targeted wounds, injuries suggesting speed and precision, not a prolonged coil and squeeze attack. Whatever killed these animals did not rely on ambush alone. It dominated them outright. Even more troubling was the lack of feeding evidence. Pythons consume their prey whole, leaving no leftovers. But in several locations, bodies were partially intact. That ruled out a constrictor entirely. Once the python theory collapsed, the situation became far more disturbing. The Everglades were dealing with an apex killer that hunted differently. Something fast, something aggressive, something confident enough to leave a trail behind. And unlike the python, this predator wasn't hiding from attention. It was expanding. That realization forced scientists to confront an unsettling possibility. The threat wasn't a snake everyone already feared. It was something hiding in plain sight, wearing a familiar shape, close enough to go unnoticed, until it was too late. The breakthrough didn't come from the deep swamp. It came from the edges of human civilization. Near a heavily populated canal system outside Miami, wildlife officials captured a young crocodile that immediately set off alarms. The location alone made no sense. This area was miles from established American crocodile nesting grounds and far outside normal movement patterns. But when biologists got a closer look, the real unease began. At first glance, it looked like an American crocodile. Same general size, same silhouette, same basic features. But the longer they studied it, the more wrong it felt. The snout was broader and heavier than expected. The head shape looked more muscular, almost reinforced. Its coloration leaned darker, with an olive-black tone rather than the lighter gray-green common to native crocs. Then came the behavior. This animal didn't retreat. It didn't shy away from handlers. Even restrained, it displayed aggressive forward posturing, lunging repeatedly with a level of confidence researchers rarely see. even in fully grown adults. This was a juvenile, yet it behaved like a dominant predator. Veteran herpetologists described the feeling as unsettling. It triggered what some called an uncanny valley response, close enough to be familiar, but different enough to feel dangerous. Initially, the team considered hybridization. Could this be a cross between an alligator and a crocodile? Genetic anomalies do happen in isolated environments, but physical measurements didn't match known hybrids. Muscle density was too high. Growth rate markers were off the charts. Worse still, reports began pouring in of similar animals. Canal sightings, aggressive encounters, crocodiles chasing boats instead of fleeing them. These weren't isolated incidents anymore. This was a pattern. While the captured juvenile was sent for DNA analysis, researchers monitored its growth. What they observed stunned them. The animal was growing nearly 30% faster than Native American crocodiles of the same age. Its feeding response was relentless. Its metabolism suggested a predator built for domination, not coexistence. That meant something terrifying. Even before the DNA results returned, scientists knew one thing for certain. This was not a stressed native animal reacting to environmental change. This was a superior competitor, an apex predator designed to take territory, not share it. If this species was breeding in Florida, and all signs pointed to yes, then the disappearance of the Everglades' kings finally made sense. They weren't dying randomly. They were being replaced. And when the DNA results came back, the situation escalated from ecological mystery to full-blown crisis. When the DNA results finally arrived, the room went silent. The genetic profile did not match the American crocodile. It didn't show hybridization. There was no mutation, no anomaly, no environmental distortion. It was a perfect match. Crocodilus niloticus, the Nile crocodile. For biologists, that name carries weight, not mystery, terror. The Nile crocodile is one of the most dangerous predators on Earth. In its native Africa, it is responsible for more human deaths every year than lions, sharks, and hippos combined. Conservative estimates place the number between 50 and 200 fatalities annually. This was not a shy estuary dweller. This was a known, documented man-eater. The implications hit immediately. The American crocodile has never recorded a single confirmed fatal attack on a human in U.S. history. The Nile crocodile has evolved to hunt large mammals, ambush prey aggressively, and defend territory with lethal force. Its biology favors dominance. Its behavior favors violence. Even worse, its size potential dwarfs Florida's native species. Full-grown Nile crocodiles can reach 18 feet in length and weigh over a ton. Their bite force ranks among the strongest ever measured in the animal kingdom. This meant the Everglades weren't experiencing a mystery die-off. They were undergoing a hostile takeover. Native crocodiles weren't just disappearing. They were being displaced, outcompeted, and possibly preyed upon by a predator that evolved to kill larger, smarter, and more dangerous prey than anything Florida had ever seen. The next question was unavoidable. How did a top-tier African apex predator end up breeding in the Florida Everglades? There was only one realistic answer: humans. Nile crocodiles don't cross oceans. They don't migrate continents. They don't arrive by accident. Investigators traced the genetic similarities between captured specimens and discovered something chilling. The animals were nearly identical. This wasn't random introduction. It was a single source: Florida's exotic pet trade. Somewhere, years earlier, a small group of Nile crocodile hatchlings had either escaped from a private facility or were deliberately released by an owner who could no longer control them. Tiny and manageable at first, they grew fast, too fast. By the time they became dangerous, it was easier to dump them into the swamp than face legal consequences. That single act of negligence changed the ecosystem forever. By the time officials realized what was happening, the invaders had already adapted, hidden among native crocs, and begun reproducing. The Everglades hadn't been invaded overnight. It had been infiltrated, slowly, quietly, and perfectly. And now, the consequences were waking up. Once the species was confirmed, the tone changed instantly. This was no longer a wildlife curiosity or an academic discovery. It was an emergency. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, alongside University of Florida researchers, launched a rapid response operation to locate and remove every Nile crocodile they could find. The problem was scale. The Everglades is vast, remote, and unforgiving. If even a small breeding population had gone undetected for years, it meant there were likely more animals than anyone realized. Tracking them was nearly impossible. Nile crocodiles don't announce themselves, they ambush, adapt, and vanish. Within weeks, 3 confirmed Nile crocodiles were captured. That number did nothing to ease fears. If 3 were found, logic dictated more existed. And unlike many invasive species, these predators don't need large numbers to cause damage. One dominant adult can clear an entire stretch of habitat. Officials faced another terrifying reality. Nile crocodiles tolerate cooler temperatures far better than American crocodiles. That meant they weren't confined to South Florida. They could move north. Rivers, canals, and coastal wetlands suddenly became potential corridors of expansion. Public safety entered the conversation for the first time. Florida's warning signs are designed around alligators, animals that avoid humans unless provoked. Nile crocodiles don't follow those rules. They hunt mammals at the water's edge. They learn routines. They strike without warning. Biologists quietly acknowledged something grim. If these animals established a stable population, Florida would be forced to rethink how people interact with water entirely. Fishing, kayaking, hiking, activities once considered low risk, could become dangerous overnight. And then came the hardest truth. There was no relocation plan, no sanctuary, no safe release option. If Nile crocodiles continued to spread, the only viable response would be permanent eradication. Not because the animals were evil, but because humans had created a threat they could no longer contain. The invasion wasn't just ecological, it was man-made, irreversible, and still unfolding. As investigators traced the origin of the Nile crocodiles, one truth became impossible to avoid. This disaster didn't begin in the swamp. It began in a living room, a backyard enclosure, or a private facility built by someone who believed they could own nature. The crocodile wasn't the villain, humans were. Florida has become ground zero for invasive species, not because the land invites them, but because people release them. Burmese pythons, green iguanas, lionfish. Each ecological crisis follows the same pattern. Someone buys an exotic animal. It grows too large, too dangerous, or too expensive to manage. And instead of taking responsibility, they dump it into the wild. The Everglades pay the price. Native American crocodiles were already fighting extinction long before the Nile crocodile arrived. Coastal mangroves have been erased for development. Water flow has been rerouted for agriculture. Pollution seeps into breeding grounds. Their habitat has been shrinking for decades, leaving them stressed and vulnerable. The arrival of the Nile crocodile wasn't just competition, it was a final blow. A super predator dropped into an ecosystem where the native apex species had already been weakened by human interference. The result was inevitable: displacement, collapse, fear. What makes this situation especially cruel is the irony. Enormous effort went into protecting native crocodiles, only for those protections to be undermined by negligence elsewhere. Conservation on one hand, destruction on the other. In the end, the Nile crocodile didn't invade Florida. It was invited. And now the state is forced to confront a brutal reality. To protect human life and prevent ecological collapse, officials may have to wage a permanent war against a predator that never should have been here in the first place. With the reality finally set in, Florida officials were forced to confront an outcome no one wanted to admit out loud. There is no humane relocation plan for Nile crocodiles. They cannot be sent back to Africa. They cannot be placed in sanctuaries. They cannot coexist safely with people. The only option left on the table is eradication. That means a permanent, aggressive removal program. It's a brutal solution, but the alternative is worse. If even a small breeding population survives, Florida faces a future unlike anything in its history. A future where warning signs don't just say alligators present, but caution residents about active predators that view humans as prey. Trails would close. Waterways would become restricted. Entire regions of the Everglades could be labeled no-go zone, and the economic impact would ripple outward. Florida's ecotourism industry depends on the idea that its wildlife is dangerous but predictable. A confirmed man-eating predator changes that narrative instantly. Fear drives visitors away. Fear reshapes public access. Fear demands constant monitoring, patrols, and costly enforcement. But the most disturbing truth sits beneath all of it. This didn't have to happen. The Nile crocodile didn't sneak in. It didn't migrate. It didn't invade on its own. It was placed here by human arrogance and irresponsibility. One decision, one release, set off a chain reaction that now threatens an entire ecosystem and the safety of everyone who enters it. Florida's swamps didn't suddenly become hostile. They were made that way. And now, officials are racing against time. Because if these crocodiles continue to spread, the Everglades won't just be a wildlife preserve anymore. They'll become a containment zone for a predator that never should have existed there at all. The question isn't whether Florida can fix this. The question is whether it's already too late. What do you think? Should Nile crocodiles be permanently removed? Or does Florida need to face the consequences of its own actions in another way? Let us know your thoughts.